You're nothing, a stain on his life. Go home before you embarrass him." Vanessa Cole said it loud enough for 300 guests to hear, then lifted her glass of red wine and poured it slowly down the front of Charlotte Bennett's dress. The wine dripped from the hem onto the marble floor. Vanessa smiled. "Oops, I didn't see you standing there. Then again, nobody ever does." She turned to the crowd, arms open. "This is Ethan's wife, everyone, the woman he forgot." Nobody moved. Nobody defended Charlotte. Then the ballroom doors opened again, and a woman walked in wearing a breathtaking red gown. If you love stories where a woman finally remembers her worth, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end. And do me a favor, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. Charlotte Bennett did not flinch. That was the first thing the people standing near her noticed. A woman had just been humiliated in front of 300 of Chicago's most powerful guests, and she did not flinch. She simply set down the small glass of sparkling water she had been holding, looked across the room at the woman in the emerald gown who had insulted her, and let out a slow, quiet breath. It was the kind of breath a person takes when they have already decided something, when the decision was made long ago in private in the dark, and all that remains is the waiting. "You hear that?" Vanessa murmured to the man beside her, laughing softly. "Not a peep. She just stands there. That's the saddest part, Ethan. She doesn't even fight back anymore." Ethan Bennett, corporate executive, broad-shouldered, expensive suit, glass of bourbon in his hand, glanced once across the room at his wife. Just once. Then he looked away as if she were a piece of furniture he had grown tired of years ago. "Leave her be," he said, but there was no protection in it. He said it the way a man swats at a fly. "She'll go home soon. She always does." Good." Vanessa slid her arm through his. "Because tonight is ours. 8 months. That was how long it had been since Charlotte first found out. 8 months since the night she sat alone in their bedroom, holding Ethan's phone, reading messages she was never meant to read, feeling the floor of her entire life quietly drop out from underneath her. She remembered everything about that night. The way her hands shook, the way the screen blurred because her eyes had filled with tears she refused to let fall, the way she walked into the bathroom, turned on the faucet so he wouldn't hear, and pressed a towel against her mouth to keep from making a sound. And then she remembered the thing that surprised her most. After the crying stopped, after the shaking stopped, she had stood up, looked at herself in the mirror, and asked a single question. Who were you before him? That question had not let her go since. Across the ballroom now, Vanessa was working the room the way she always did. She was beautiful, and she knew it, and she used it like currency. She touched arms. She tilted her head when men spoke. She laughed at the right moments and let her eyes linger just long enough to make people feel chosen. She was a luxury brand executive, and she sold the same thing professionally and personally. The feeling that you were standing next to someone who mattered. "You know what I love about these galas?" she said to a small cluster of donors. "Everyone shows you exactly who they are, the ones who matter and the ones who fade." She didn't look at Charlotte when she said it, but she didn't have to. Everyone understood. A woman in pearls beside her gave a thin, uncomfortable smile. "That's a little cruel, Vanessa." "It's not cruel, darling. It's honest. There's a difference." Charlotte heard it. She heard all of it. And here was the thing nobody at that gala understood yet. 8 months ago, the old Charlotte would have crumbled under those words. She would have found a quiet hallway, called a cab, and gone home to cry into a pillow while her husband stayed out until 2 in the morning. But the woman standing by the marble column was not the old Charlotte. She just hadn't shown them yet. "Excuse me, are you Charlotte Bennett?" The voice belonged to an older gentleman with silver hair and kind eyes, holding a program from the evening's event. Charlotte turned to him and smiled a real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. "I am. Forgive me for interrupting your evening. My name is Harold Whitman. I sit on the board of the Lincoln Park Community Foundation." He extended his hand. "I had the pleasure of touring the literacy center your team redesigned over on the west side. I've been to a lot of ribbon cuttings in my life, Mrs. Bennett. Most of them I forget by the time I get to my car." He paused. "I have not been able to stop thinking about that one." Charlotte felt something warm bloom in her chest. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Whitman." "Harold, please." He shook his head slowly. "The way you arranged that reading room, the light, the little chairs sized for children, the shelves they could actually reach. My granddaughter is 6. I brought her there last week and she didn't want to leave." His voice caught just slightly. "You built a place where a child feels like the world was made for them. Do you understand how rare that is?" "I do," Charlotte said softly. "That's exactly why I built it." 20 feet away, Vanessa had stopped talking. She was watching. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the way Harold Whitman, a man she had been trying to get an introduction to for 2 years, a man whose foundation could change the trajectory of any career it touched, was standing in front of Ethan's invisible wife, with his whole body turned toward her, listening like she was the only person in the room. "Who is she talking to?" Vanessa asked. Ethan glanced over. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Harold Whitman. You know him. Everyone knows him. I've been trying to get a meeting with his foundation for 18 months. His assistant won't return my calls." He took a slow drink of his bourbon. "Why is he talking to Charlotte?" Vanessa laughed, but it came out a half-beat too late. "Probably mistook her for someone important. He'll figure it out." But Harold Whitman did not figure it out, because there was nothing to figure out. He had not mistaken her for anyone. He knew exactly who she was, and that was precisely why he was standing there. "I'll tell you something, Charlotte," Harold went on. "I've watched a lot of people in this city chase importance. Big titles, bigger houses, the right table at the right restaurant. And you know what I've learned in 71 years? He leaned in. The ones chasing it never have it. The ones who have it are usually too busy doing the work to notice they've got it." He smiled. "You strike me as the second kind." And there by the marble column, Charlotte Bennett understood something she had been circling for 8 long months. The years she had spent shrinking, apologizing, making herself smaller so that Ethan could feel larger, those years had not erased her. They had only buried her. And the woman doing the burying had been Charlotte herself. She remembered the exact afternoon she'd decided to stop. It was a Tuesday. Rain against the windows. She had been sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store, engine off, hands in her lap, when she realized she could not remember the last time she had laughed out loud. Not the polite laugh she gave at Ethan's work dinners, a real one, the kind that surprises you. She had sat there in that parked car and made a list out loud to no one. "I used to design things," her own voice in the empty car. "I used to have a business. I used to have friends who called me not him. I used to read 3 books a week." A long pause. "I used to be somebody's favorite person. When did I stop being anybody's favorite person? And then quieter than all the rest. When did I stop being my own?" She did not go home and confront Ethan that day. She had already learned that confrontation gave him something to defend against, something to twist some way to make her feel like the unreasonable one. Instead, she did something far more dangerous to a man like Ethan. She stopped needing him. The next morning she called her old business partner, a sharp, funny woman named Denise, whom she hadn't spoken to in 3 years because Ethan had once called her a bad influence. "Charlotte," Denise had answered, stunned. "Oh my God. I thought you fell off the face of the earth." "I kind of did," Charlotte said. "I'm trying to climb back on. Are you still doing residential?" "Honey," Denise said, "for you I'll do anything. When can we have coffee?" They had coffee the next day. And the day after that, Charlotte reopened her design business out of a tiny rented room with 1 desk and a secondhand laptop. She told no one, not her husband, not her neighbors. She did it the way you protect a small flame on a windy night, with your whole body curved around it so the wind can't reach. "Are you even listening to me?" Vanessa's voice cut through the ballroom sharp, now edged with something she didn't usually let people hear. Frustration. "I'm listening," Ethan said, though his eyes were still tracking his wife across the room. "You keep looking at her." "I'm not." "You are. You've looked at her 4 times in the last 2 minutes. Vanessa's smile was still fixed in place, but it had gone brittle like ice, that's beautiful right up until it cracks. "I've seen the way you look at her, Ethan, and trust me, this isn't it. So what's changed?" What had changed was simple, though. Ethan would not say it out loud, not even to himself. Not yet. What had changed was that for the first time in years, his wife was not looking at him. For their entire marriage, Charlotte had oriented herself toward Ethan like a plant toward a window. Where was he? What did he need? Was he pleased? Was he annoyed? Had she said the wrong thing? He had grown so used to the warmth of all that attention that he stopped feeling it the way you stop feeling a sweater you've worn all day. And now it was gone, and the absence of it was the loudest thing in the room. "Nothing's changed," he lied. "Good," Vanessa said, "because I didn't spend 8 months becoming the most important woman in your life to lose you to a discount housewife in a thrift store dress." The words came out before she could stop them, too loud, too bitter, and the woman in pearls beside her actually took a step back. "Vanessa," the woman murmured. What it's true. But Vanessa's hand was tight around her glass, now the knuckles white. Charlotte, meanwhile, had been joined by a third and then a fourth person. Word travels fast in a room full of ambitious people. If Harold Whitman thinks she's worth talking to, the thinking went, then she is worth talking to. A city councilwoman drifted over, then a developer, then the executive director of the very nonprofit hosting the gala, a brisk, warm woman named Patricia Vega, who clasped both of Charlotte's hands. There you are, Patricia said. I've been looking for you all night. We need to talk before the program starts. Something's come up, something good, and you are not going to believe it. What is it? Charlotte asked. Patricia glanced around, lowered her voice, but she was smiling so widely she could barely contain it. Not yet, not here. But Charlotte, I want you to stay close to the stage tonight. Promise me. Patricia, what's going on? Just promise me. I promise. And across the room, Vanessa watched the executive director of the gala, the woman whose name was printed on every invitation, embraced Ethan's wife like an old friend, and felt the first cold finger of fear touch the back of her neck. She did not understand it yet, but she felt it. I need some air, she said abruptly. You're leaving? Ethan asked. I'm getting air. There's a difference. She set her glass down hard on a passing tray. Stay here. Keep an eye on your ghost. She walked off toward the terrace heels, striking the floor like little hammers, and for a moment, Ethan Bennett stood alone in the middle of the most important social event of the season, holding a half-empty glass of bourbon, watching two women he thought he understood completely. He did not understand either of them. He did not understand that the woman storming off to the terrace had built her entire identity on being wanted, and that the moment she was no longer the most wanted woman in the room, she would have nothing left. And he did not understand that the woman by the stage, the wife he had reduced to a ghost, had spent 8 months building something he could not take from her, could not criticize away, could not diminish with a sigh or a sideways glance. She had built herself. Mrs. Bennett. A young server appeared at Charlotte's elbow with a small folded note. Someone asked me to bring this to you. Charlotte unfolded it. The handwriting was Ethan's. She would know it anywhere. We need to talk, after the program. Please. She read it twice. Then she folded it back up, slipped it into her small clutch, and felt absolutely nothing. Not anger, not hope, not the old desperate flutter that used to seize her chest whenever Ethan offered her even a scrap of his attention. Nothing. And the absence of that old feeling, the silence where the longing used to be told her everything she needed to know. She was free. She had been free for months. Tonight was simply the night the rest of the world would find out. She thought back to the morning 2 weeks ago, the morning everything had quietly tipped over into something extraordinary. She had been on a video call with Denise and a small design team walking through plans for a second literacy center when Patricia Vega's name had lit up her phone. She'd almost let it go to voicemail. She was glad now that she hadn't. Charlotte, Patricia had said breathless, are you sitting down? Should I be? The State Literacy Coalition saw the West Side Center, the whole project, the design, the numbers, the way enrollment doubled in 3 months. A pause. Charlotte, they want to use your model statewide. Every center, your design, your philosophy. They're calling it a blueprint. Charlotte had set down her coffee very, very carefully. Say that again, she'd whispered. You're about to become the woman who reimagined how an entire state teaches children to read. Patricia's voice cracked. And honey, I have been doing this work for 22 years. I have never not once seen anyone deserve it more. That was the secret Charlotte had been carrying into the gala. That was the thing nobody in the ballroom knew. Not Ethan, not Vanessa, not the donors who were only now drifting toward her because an old man with kind eyes had stood and talked to her. She had not come to the gala to be seen. She had come because Patricia had asked her to, and because Charlotte Bennett kept her promises now, especially to the people who had believed in her when she'd had nothing to offer but a dream and a rented room with one desk. The dress had been Denise's idea. You are going to that gala, Denise had said, and you are not wearing beige. I have watched you wear beige for 10 years to keep from upsetting that man. You are done apologizing for taking up space. Denise. Red. You are wearing red. The kind of red that walks into a room and dares it to look away. Denise had crossed her arms. Not to impress anyone, not for him, for her. For who? For the girl in the parked car, the one who couldn't remember the last time she laughed. You wear it for her, Charlotte, because she made it. She got you here. And so Charlotte had bought the red gown, not to win Ethan back, not to humiliate Vanessa, not for revenge, though revenge has a funny way of arriving uninvited when you stop chasing it. She had bought it for the woman in the parked car. Out on the terrace, Vanessa Cole gripped the cold stone railing and stared down at the city lights without seeing them. "This is nothing," she said to herself. "This is one old man, one conversation. By next week no one will remember." But the words sounded thin even to her, and she knew it. Because Vanessa Cole had built a life on a simple, brutal arithmetic. Be the most beautiful woman in the room and you would always have power. Beauty opened doors. Beauty got you the table, the introduction, the man. Beauty was the only thing she had ever fully trusted, because beauty had never let her down. But for the first time in her adult life, she had walked into a room as the most beautiful woman in it and watched every important person drift past her, drawn instead toward a woman in red who wasn't even trying. And somewhere in the cold air of that terrace, a terrible question began to form. A question Vanessa had spent her whole life making sure she would never have to ask. What if beauty was never the thing that mattered most? What if she had bet everything on the wrong currency? She pushed the thought away. She fixed her lipstick in the dark reflection of the glass doors. She squared her shoulders. "Pull yourself together," she whispered. "You are Vanessa Cole. You don't lose to housewives." But when she walked back inside, the first thing she saw was Patricia Vega tapping the microphone on the stage, and the room beginning to quiet, and 300 of the most powerful people in Chicago turning toward the front. And standing near the steps to that stage, calm and luminous in a gown the color of a held breath finally released, was Charlotte Bennett. Ethan crossed the room toward Vanessa. "There you are," he said. "The program's starting. Where did you—" "Why is Patricia looking at your wife?" Vanessa interrupted. Ethan turned, and he saw it too. Patricia Vega, microphone in hand, scanning the crowd, her eyes finding Charlotte and lighting up. "Good evening, everyone," Patricia began, her voice warm and steady over the speakers. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Before we begin our formal program, I want to take a moment to recognize someone in this room, someone whose work has quite frankly changed the future of literacy education in this state." A murmur moved through the crowd. Ethan felt his stomach drop before his mind had even caught up. "8 months ago," Patricia continued, "a designer walked into my office with no funding, no fanfare, and one idea. She believed that the spaces where children learn to read shouldn't feel like institutions. They should feel like invitations. She believed that a child who feels welcome will believe they belong. And she believed it so completely that she rebuilt our flagship center for almost nothing, working nights and weekends, asking for no recognition at all." The murmur grew louder. People were looking around now, trying to find the face that matched the story. "That center," Patricia said, "is now the model for a statewide initiative. Every new community learning center in Illinois will be built on her blueprint, her vision, her belief that every child deserves to feel that the world was made for them." Vanessa's lips had parted. She was shaking her head slowly, as if she could rewind what was happening by sheer force of will. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia said, and her eyes found Charlotte's, and her whole face softened with something that looked to everyone watching exactly like love. "Please join me in honoring the woman behind it all, a designer, a leader, and one of the most quietly extraordinary people I have ever had the privilege to know." She lifted her hand toward the steps. "Charlotte Bennett." For one full second, the ballroom was completely silent, and then it erupted. The applause came like a wave, building from the front of the room and rolling backward, 300 people rising to their feet, the sound of it filling the enormous space until the chandeliers seemed to tremble with it. People were standing, people were cheering. Harold Whitman was beaming, clapping so hard his program fell from his hands, and Charlotte Bennett walked up the steps to the stage in her red gown, into the full light, and turned to face the room that had called her invisible. She was not invisible now. Ethan stood frozen, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides, the applause crashing over him like water over a stone. His wife, the woman he had reduced, the woman he had criticized into silence, the woman he had walked past for years, the woman he had brought his mistress to humiliate not 1 hour ago. His wife was standing in the spotlight while the entire city rose to its feet for her, and beside him Vanessa Cole was not clapping. She was staring at Charlotte with her hand pressed flat against her chest, her face the color of ash, and for the first time in her gleaming, calculated life, Vanessa understood that she was watching something she could never compete with, not because Charlotte was more beautiful, but because Charlotte had something Vanessa had spent her whole life pretending she didn't need. She had earned it. Charlotte raised the microphone. The room went quiet again, hungry now, leaning in. "Thank you," Charlotte said. Her voice did not shake. "I almost didn't come tonight." A soft, knowing laugh moved through the crowd. "For a long time," she went on, "I believed that the most important thing I could do was make myself small enough to fit into someone else's life." She paused, and her eyes moved just once across the room, past Ethan, past the woman in the emerald gown beside him, and then back to the warm sea of faces in front of her. "I want to talk tonight about what happens when a person finally stops doing that." And in the back of the room, holding a glass he no longer wanted, Ethan Bennett realized with a sick and dawning certainty that the woman on that stage was never going to read his note, was never going to meet him after the program, was never ever coming back. He had not lost her tonight. He had lost her a long, long time ago. He had simply been too busy looking elsewhere to notice she was already gone. "I want to talk tonight about what happens when a person finally stops making themselves small." Charlotte's voice carried across the ballroom steady and clear, and 300 people leaned in to listen. But to understand how she got onto that stage in that red gown, with the whole city rising to its feet, you have to go back 8 months. You have to go back to the night the floor of her entire life quietly dropped out from under her. It was a Thursday. Ethan was supposed to be at a conference in Denver. Charlotte was folding laundry on their bed when his phone buzzed on the nightstand, and out of habit, out of the muscle memory of a wife who had stopped thinking of her husband's phone as private long ago, she glanced at the screen. The message was from someone saved as V. It said, "Tell me you're thinking about last night the way I am." Charlotte stood very still. A pair of his socks was still in her hands. She remembered that detail for the rest of her life, the warmth of the socks fresh from the dryer, because everything else about that moment went cold. She did not scream. She did not throw the phone. She set down the socks, picked up the phone, and unlocked it, because of course she knew the code. The code was their anniversary. A date she now understood meant nothing to him at all. What she found was 8 months of messages. "He's never home anyway. She doesn't even notice. Honestly, I don't know why he stays married. She's like furniture." Charlotte read every word. She read them standing in the bedroom they had shared for 11 years, and with each message something inside her that had been bending for a very long time finally quietly broke. But here is what surprised her. After it broke, she did not fall apart. She walked into the bathroom, turned on the faucet so the empty house wouldn't echo with her crying, pressed a towel against her mouth, and let herself feel all of it for exactly 10 minutes. She timed it. 10 minutes of grief for 11 years of marriage. And when the 10 minutes were over, she turned off the faucet, washed her face, looked at herself in the mirror, and asked the question that would change everything. Who were you before him? The next morning, she did not confront Ethan. This is the part everyone gets wrong, she would think later. Everyone assumes the strong move is the loud one, the screaming, the thrown wedding ring, the suitcase by the door. But Charlotte had spent 11 years learning exactly how Ethan operated. Confrontation gave him something to push against. A scene gave him a way to make her the villain. The moment she raised her voice, he would lower his, and somehow by the end of it, she would be the one apologizing. So she did the one thing he would never see coming. She said nothing, and she started taking herself back one quiet piece at a time. That same week, she called Denise. "Charlotte." Denise had picked up on the second ring, her voice cautious. "Is this really you? I thought you fell off the earth." "I did," Charlotte said. "Denise, I need a coffee and I need a friend, and I think I might need a business partner. Are any of those available?" There was a pause. Then Denise laughed, that big, warm, slightly outrageous laugh that Ethan had always hated. "Honey, get in the car. I'll have all 3 waiting." They met at a diner on the north side the next morning, and for the first hour, Charlotte didn't say much. She just listened to Denise talk and felt something in her chest she hadn't felt in years. She felt like a person, not a wife, not an accessory. A person sitting in a diner drinking bad coffee being seen. "So," Denise finally said, setting down her mug, "you gonna tell me what happened? Or are we gonna keep pretending you called me out of nowhere after 3 years because you missed the pancakes?" Charlotte looked at her old friend for a long moment. "He's been having an affair," she said. 8 months, maybe longer. She calls me furniture." Denise's face went hard. "I will kill him. No, Charlotte said, and she was almost smiling. That's the thing, Denise. I don't want him dead. I don't even want him sorry, not really. She wrapped both hands around her coffee. I want to be someone again. Someone he can't take credit for and can't take away. I want to walk into a room and have it be mine. Denise studied her. You know what I love about you, Charlotte? Even buried under that man for a decade, the spark never went out. He just covered it up. She reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Let's go dig it back out. That was the beginning. Charlotte rented a tiny room above a bakery. One desk, one second-hand laptop, the smell of fresh bread coming up through the floorboards every morning. She told no one, not her neighbors, not her sister, certainly not Ethan. She protected that small flame with her whole body because she had learned what happened when she let Ethan near the things she loved. He had a gift for making them feel foolish. The first month she had 2 clients, both friends of Denise, both small jobs. The second month 4, and then came the phone call that changed the trajectory of everything. It was Patricia Vega, executive director of a literacy nonprofit, and she had heard through a friend of a client of a friend about a designer who worked miracles on no budget. I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Bennett, Patricia had said. We have almost no money. We have a community center on the west side that looks like a DMV waiting room, and we have children who don't want to come there to learn to read, and I can't blame them. I can't pay you what you're worth. I can barely pay you anything. Charlotte had asked one question. Can I see it? She drove out to the west side that afternoon, and standing in that gray, fluorescent-lit room with its cold metal chairs and its sad cinder-block walls, Charlotte felt something she hadn't felt about a project in years. She felt like it mattered. I'll do it, she told Patricia. For materials cost, nothing else. Charlotte, I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering. There's a difference. She was already looking at the windows, already imagining the light. Just let me do it my way. No committees, no approvals. Trust me. Why? Patricia had asked. Why would you do this for almost nothing? And Charlotte had told her the truth. Because I spent 11 years being told my ideas didn't matter, and I need to find out if that was true. She'd turned to face Patricia. I think this room and I can find out together. She poured herself into that center. Nights, weekends, every hour. Ethan was off with the woman named V. Charlotte was on the west side with a paint roller and a vision. She built reading nooks sized for small bodies. She put the shelves low so children could reach their own books. She filled the place with warm light and soft corners, and the radical idea that a child who feels welcome will believe they belong. And while she did it, Ethan never noticed she was gone. That was the thing that still amazed her even now. For 8 months she had been living an entire second life, building a business, building a center, becoming herself again, and her own husband had not noticed a single thing. He was so consumed with Vanessa, so certain that Charlotte was exactly where he'd left her furniture in a quiet house that he never once asked where she went at night. How was your day? She'd ask him at dinner on the rare nights he was home. Long, he'd say, not looking up from his phone. Yours. Long, she'd answer, and she'd think about the 7 children who had run into her newly finished reading room that afternoon and gasped, actually gasped, and she'd smile down at her plate, and he never asked why. The West Side Center opened on a Saturday in March. Charlotte didn't invite Ethan. She didn't even tell him it existed. But Patricia was there, and Denise and 40 families who had never had a place like this in their neighborhood, and a 6-year-old girl who climbed into the reading nook, opened a picture book, and announced to the entire room, "This is the best place I've ever been." Charlotte had to step outside so no one would see her cry. The center's enrollment doubled in 3 months, then tripled. Word spread. Other neighborhoods started asking for the same thing. And then 2 weeks before the gala, Patricia had called with the news that detonated quietly in the middle of Charlotte's ordinary afternoon. The State Literacy Coalition saw the center, the whole model. They want to make it the blueprint for every new center in Illinois. Patricia's voice had been shaking. Charlotte, you're about to become the woman who reimagined how an entire state teaches its children to read. Charlotte had set her coffee down very, very carefully. Say that again, she'd whispered. And now here she was. 8 months from the towel pressed against her mouth in a dark bathroom, standing in a borrowed spotlight that wasn't borrowed at all, that she had built with her own 2 hands in a red gown that meant something only she fully understood. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because there was still the matter of the gala itself, And there was still the matter of Vanessa Cole, who 20 minutes before that triumphant announcement had poured a glass of wine down Charlotte's dress and called her a stain. The thing nobody in that ballroom knew, not Ethan, not Vanessa, not the donors, now drifting toward Charlotte like iron filings to a magnet, was that Charlotte had recognized Vanessa the instant she walked in. She had seen photographs. She had, in a moment of weakness 3 months earlier, looked the woman up. Vanessa Cole, luxury brand executive, beautiful in the way that magazines are beautiful, polished and bright and hard. The woman who had called her furniture, the woman who was at this very moment dripping wine onto her shoes and smirking. And the old Charlotte, the Charlotte from 8 months ago, would have crumbled. But the woman standing there in the wine-stained dress did something that confused everyone watching. She looked down at the red wine spreading across the fabric, looked back up at Vanessa, and she smiled. "Thank you," Charlotte said. Vanessa blinked. "What?" "I said thank you." Charlotte's voice was perfectly calm. "You just made my decision very easy." She did not explain what she meant. She simply turned and walked toward the restrooms head high, leaving Vanessa standing there in the silence with her empty glass and the first cold suspicion that something had not gone the way she'd planned. In the restroom, Charlotte ran into a problem. The wine had soaked through the lower half of her dress, an ordinary navy dress, the kind of safe, forgettable dress she'd worn to 100 of Ethan's functions. It was ruined, and she had 30 minutes before Patricia took the stage. She stood there staring at herself, and for one terrible moment the old voice came back. The voice that sounded so much like Ethan. "Just go home. You don't belong here. You're embarrassing yourself." And then her phone buzzed. A text from Denise. "How's the Lion's Den? You showing them who you are yet?" Charlotte stared at the ruined dress. Then she texted back, "Vanessa poured wine on me. Dress is destroyed. I have 30 minutes." The reply came in 3 seconds. "Get in my car, now, front entrance." "Denise, you're not even here." "I'm here. I've been parked outside for an hour because I had a feeling you'd need me. And honey, I came prepared. Move." Charlotte ran, in ruined heels across a marble lobby out the front doors, and there was Denise's car at the curb, and Denise leaning out the window, grinning like a woman who had been waiting her whole life for this exact emergency. "Back seat," Denise said. "Garment bag." Charlotte opened the back door, and there, zipped inside a long black bag, was the red gown, the one Denise had begged her to wear weeks ago, the one Charlotte had bought and then chickened out of choosing the safe navy instead. "You kept it in your car," Charlotte breathed. "I knew you'd lose your nerve," Denise said. "You always reach for the beige, so I kept the red close just in case the universe handed us a reason." She turned around in her seat and her eyes were shining. "Looks like the universe came through. Now get changed. You've got a city to stun." Charlotte changed in the back of that car in a parking garage, her hands trembling, and when she stepped out, she was no longer wearing the dress of a woman who apologized for taking up space. She was wearing red. "For the girl in the parked car," Denise whispered, fixing a strand of Charlotte's hair. "Remember, you wear it for her, the one who couldn't remember the last time she laughed." "I remember," Charlotte said. "Then go. And Charlotte," Denise grabbed her hand one last time, "don't you dare make yourself small in there. Not tonight, not ever again." Charlotte walked back toward the ballroom, and as she crossed the lobby, something happened inside her. The fear didn't disappear exactly. It just stopped being in charge. 8 months of work, 8 months of becoming all of it gathered behind her like a current, and she stopped being a woman walking nervously into a party and became a woman walking deliberately into her own life. She reached the ballroom doors. She took one breath, and she pushed them open. The doors swung wide, and for a moment the noise of 300 conversations continued, and then, like a wave hitting a wall, it stopped. The woman in the breathtaking red gown stood in the doorway, and the entire room turned to look. Vanessa Cole was mid-sentence holding court with a cluster of donors telling them, "Honestly, you should have seen her face. She just stood there dripping like a..." And the words died in her throat. Because the woman she had humiliated 20 minutes ago was standing in the doorway, transformed not into someone new, but into someone fully herself, and she was magnificent. "Who is that?" one of the donors murmured. "I don't know," said another, "but my God." And across the room, Ethan Bennett, who had not looked directly at his wife in years, who had trained himself not to see her, turned toward the doors with everyone else. I didn't recognize her at first. That was the part that would haunt him later. For 3 full seconds, Ethan Bennett looked at the most striking woman in the room and felt the ordinary pull any man feels toward something beautiful and thought, who is she? And then she moved into the light, and his glass nearly slipped from his hand. Charlotte, he said, though no one heard him. That's Charlotte. Beside him, Vanessa heard it, and she turned to look at the woman she had called a stain and watched her walk into the ballroom like she owned it, watched donors and city officials and the executive director herself begin to turn toward her, and felt the floor of her own carefully built world tilt beneath her heels. That's not possible, Vanessa whispered. That's the same woman. That's the furniture. But it wasn't the same woman. And on some level, watching Charlotte cross that floor, Vanessa understood that it had never really been about the wine or the dress or even Ethan. It had been about a question Vanessa had spent her whole life avoiding, and Charlotte had just walked through the door carrying the answer. What if the thing that makes a woman unforgettable was never the thing Vanessa had bet everything on? Charlotte didn't rush. She moved through the room slowly, and the room came to her. Harold Whitman intercepted her first, the silver-haired board member with the kind eyes, and the moment he started speaking to her, the moment the most respected philanthropist in Chicago turned his entire body toward Ethan's wife and listened to her like she was the only person worth listening to, Vanessa felt the first true crack run through her composure. Why is he talking to her? Vanessa said low and tight. Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. He was still staring at his wife. Ethan, Vanessa grabbed his arm. Why is Harold Whitman talking to your wife? I don't know, Ethan said, and then quieter almost to himself in a voice she had never heard him use, I don't think I know anything about her at all. It was the truest thing he had said in years, and it had come 8 months too late. Patricia Vega was making her way toward the stage, now microphone in hand, and as she passed Charlotte, she caught her hand and squeezed it and said something into her ear that made Charlotte's eyes fill, and Vanessa watched all of it, every gesture, every warm glance directed at the woman she had tried to erase, and felt the night she had planned slipping through her manicured fingers. She did not yet know about the announcement. She did not yet know that in 90 seconds Patricia would tap that microphone and tell 300 people that the woman in the red gown had just changed the future of an entire state. But she knew enough. She knew that she had walked into this gala as the most beautiful woman in the room, certain that beauty was a throne no one could take from her, and that somehow impossibly a woman she had dismissed as furniture had walked in after her and made the throne disappear. And as Patricia Vega stepped up onto the stage and the lights came up, and Charlotte Bennett turned toward the front of the room with the calm of a woman who finally knew exactly who she was, Vanessa Cole pressed her hand flat against her chest, where her heart was beating much too fast, and felt the absolute certainty of her entire life begin quietly and completely to come apart. Patricia Vega tapped the microphone twice, and the room fell quiet. Good evening, everyone. Before we begin our formal program, I want to take a moment to recognize someone in this room, someone whose work has quite frankly changed the future of literacy education in this state. A murmur moved through the crowd. 300 heads turned toward the stage, and in the back of the room, Ethan Bennett felt his stomach drop before his mind had even caught up to why. Vanessa stood beside him, still pale from the sight of Charlotte in red, still rattled by Harold Whitman's attention, and she had no idea, none at all, that the worst was still coming. 8 months ago, Patricia continued, a designer walked into my office with no funding, no fanfare, and one idea. She believed that the spaces where children learn to read shouldn't feel like institutions. They should feel like invitations. Who is she talking about? Vanessa whispered. Ethan didn't answer. A terrible suspicion was forming in his chest, and he was praying he was wrong. She rebuilt our flagship center for almost nothing. Nights, weekends, her own hands. She asked for no recognition. She asked for no money. She asked only that we trust her. Patricia's voice grew warmer, stronger. That center is now the model for a statewide initiative. Every new community learning center in Illinois will be built on her blueprint, her vision. The murmur swelled into something electric. People were craning their necks now, searching the room for the face that matched the story. Vanessa's lips parted. She was shaking her head slowly, the way a person does when they sense a catastrophe coming and cannot move out of its path. No, she breathed. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia's eyes swept the crowd and found Charlotte standing near the steps in her red gown, and Patricia's whole face softened with something that looked to everyone watching exactly like love. Please join me in honoring the woman behind it all, a designer, a leader, and one of the most quietly extraordinary people I have ever known." She lifted her hand. "Charlotte Bennett." For one full second, the ballroom was silent, and then it erupted. The applause came like a wave, building from the front and rolling backward, 300 people rising to their feet, the sound filling the enormous room until the chandeliers seemed to tremble. People stood, people cheered. Harold Whitman clapped so hard his program fell from his hands and he didn't even bend to pick it up. And Vanessa Cole stood frozen in the middle of it all, the only person in the room not moving, the wine still drying on the dress she had ruined 20 minutes ago, watching the woman she had called furniture, the woman she had called a stain, walk up the steps into the full light while the entire city of Chicago rose to its feet for her. "That's not possible," Vanessa said. No one heard her. "That's not... She's nobody. She's nobody." But the room disagreed. The room was on its feet. Charlotte reached the top of the steps and turned to face them. And the strangest thing happened to Ethan in that moment. He had been married to this woman for 11 years. He knew the exact shape of her shoulders, the way she stood when she was nervous, the way she folded her hands when she wanted to disappear. And the woman on that stage stood like none of those things. She stood like she had nowhere else she'd rather be. He did not recognize her, his own wife, and the not recognizing hit him harder than anything else that night because it told him a truth he had spent 11 years refusing to look at. He had never actually seen her. He had seen a role, a function, a wife. And the entire time this woman, this luminous, formidable woman, had been standing right beside him, and he had walked past her every single day. Charlotte raised the microphone. The room went quiet again, hungry, leaning in. "Thank you," she said. Her voice did not shake. "I almost didn't come tonight." A soft, knowing laugh rippled through the crowd. "And earlier this evening," Charlotte went on, "someone reminded me exactly why I almost stayed home." The laugh died. The room stilled. And every person who had witnessed the wine, the smirk, the word stain, every person who had stood silent while Vanessa humiliated her, felt the floor shift beneath them. Vanessa's blood turned to ice. "She wouldn't," Vanessa whispered. "She wouldn't dare." But Charlotte did not name her. That was the genius of it, the thing that made it land so much harder than any accusation could have. She simply held the moment, let it stretch, let 300 people remember what they had seen and feel, ashamed of their silence. And then she let them off the hook with a grace that made Vanessa look small, without Charlotte ever lowering herself to point. "For a long time," Charlotte said, "I believed the most important thing I could do was make myself small enough to fit into someone else's life. I let people tell me my ideas didn't matter. I let people tell me I was invisible." She paused. "And the worst part is, for a while I believed them." Ethan felt every word like a stone dropped into still water. "But I want to tell you what I learned." Charlotte's eyes moved across the crowd, warm, steady, unhurried. Being overlooked is not the same as being worthless. Being quiet is not the same as being weak. And the people who mistake your kindness for permission to diminish you, and here just for a flicker, her gaze touched the back of the room, are telling you everything about themselves and nothing about you. The applause that followed was not polite. It was thunder. And Vanessa Cole, standing in the middle of that thunder, understood that she had just been dismantled in front of the most important people in Chicago, and that she could not say a single word in her own defense, because to defend herself, she would have to admit she was the one Charlotte meant. She turned to Ethan, desperate for an anchor. "Are you going to just stand there?" But Ethan wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his wife. And that, more than the applause, more than the speech, more than the red gown, was the moment Vanessa Cole felt the ground give way completely, because she had built her entire relationship with Ethan on being the woman he couldn't look away from. And right now, in front of everyone, he could not take his eyes off the woman he was supposed to have left behind. "Ethan," her voice cracked. "Ethan, look at me." He didn't. "Look at me." A few heads turned. Vanessa realized she had said it too loud and pulled herself back, smoothing her dress with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. On the stage, Charlotte was wrapping up. "I want to thank Patricia and Harold and everyone who believed in a room full of low shelves and good light." A laugh. "But mostly I want to thank a friend who kept a red dress in the back of her car for 3 weeks because she knew I'd need it before I did." In the crowd, Denise let out a whoop that made everyone laugh, and Charlotte found her face and mouthed, "Thank you." And for a moment the two women just looked at each other across the room, and the whole gala felt like it was happening around the edges of that single, private, unbreakable thing. Vanessa watched that too. The friendship, the loyalty, the way someone loved Charlotte enough to be parked outside for an hour just in case. And she thought with a sick lurch, when was the last time anyone waited outside for me? She couldn't remember, because the answer was never. People wanted to be seen with Vanessa. People wanted to be near her light. But no one had ever sat in a parked car for an hour for Vanessa Cole, because Vanessa had never once let anyone close enough to need her that way. Charlotte stepped down from the stage to another wave of applause, and the room swallowed her in congratulations. Donors, officials, a reporter from the Tribune who appeared out of nowhere with a notepad. Charlotte handled all of it with an ease that looked effortless, and was in fact 8 months of quiet rebuilding made visible. And Ethan Bennett began slowly to move toward her. Vanessa caught his sleeve. "Where are you going?" "I need to talk to her." "You need to talk to me." Her voice was rising again, fraying at the edges. "Ethan, what is happening right now? An hour ago, she was nothing. An hour ago, you brought me here. You held my hand in front of these people. You told me tonight was ours." She was almost pleading now, and she hated the sound of it, hated that Charlotte had reduced her to this. What changed? Ethan stopped. He looked at Vanessa, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw her clearly too. The careful makeup, the expensive gown, the beauty that had pulled him in 8 months ago when his marriage had gone quiet and his ego had gone hungry. And he realized he felt nothing. "Nothing changed," Ethan said slowly. "That's what I'm just now understanding. Nothing changed tonight, Vanessa. The truth was always there. I just couldn't see it because I didn't want to." "What truth?" "That I threw away the most remarkable person I've ever known," he said, "for a woman I don't even like." Vanessa recoiled as if he'd struck her. "You don't mean that." "I do." He shook his head, and there was a kind of horror in his own voice, the horror of a man watching the wreckage of his life come into focus all at once. "God help me, I do. 8 months, Vanessa. 8 months I spent with you, and the whole time she was building something that's going to outlive both of us. And I never even asked where she went at night." He laughed, but it was a broken sound. "I never asked. I was so busy with you, I never asked my own wife a single real question." "So this is my fault." Vanessa's voice spiked sharp with panic. "You came to me, Ethan. You pursued me. Don't you dare stand here and—" "I'm not blaming you." He cut her off, tired, now deflated. "I'm blaming me, for all of it. I just can't keep pretending anymore." He looked toward Charlotte across the room, surrounded by people who admired her, and his face did something complicated and sad. "I have to talk to her." "And say what?" Vanessa demanded. "That you've changed your mind, that you want her back." She laughed, brittle and desperate. "Look at her, Ethan. She's not going to take you back. Look at her face. She's already gone." And that was the cruelest thing Vanessa could have said, because it was true, and Ethan knew it was true, and he walked toward Charlotte anyway, because a drowning man will reach for anything. Vanessa stood alone. This was the part she would replay for weeks afterward. The moment she found herself standing alone in the center of a crowded ballroom in a gown that cost more than most people's rent, beautiful and polished and utterly, completely alone. The donors had drifted toward Charlotte. The officials had drifted toward Charlotte. Even Ethan, her Ethan, the man she had built the last 8 months around, was walking away from her toward the wife she'd called furniture. And nobody was looking at Vanessa at all. For a woman whose entire sense of self was built on being looked at, it was a kind of death. She had spent her whole life learning one lesson, drilling it into herself since she was a teenager, who discovered that her face could open doors no amount of work seemed to open. Be beautiful, and you will be wanted. Be wanted, and you will be powerful. Be powerful, and you will never be hurt the way you were hurt before anyone wanted you. It had worked. For 20 years it had worked, and tonight in the space of 1 hour a woman in a red dress had shown her that the whole structure was built on sand, because Charlotte hadn't beaten her at beauty. Charlotte had simply made beauty irrelevant. She had walked into the room with something Vanessa didn't have and had never thought she needed, and the moment it appeared, every door Vanessa's face had opened, swung quietly shut. Charlotte had earned hers, and you cannot compete with earned. Vanessa grabbed a glass of champagne off a passing tray and drank half of it in one swallow. Her hand was shaking. Across the room she watched Ethan reach Charlotte's side, watched him lean in to say something. watched Charlotte turn to him with an expression of such perfect, unbothered calm that it was almost worse than anger. "Charlotte," Ethan said, "can we talk please, somewhere quiet?" Charlotte looked at him, and for a moment the entire 11 years of their marriage passed between them in silence. The early days when he'd been kind, the slow erosion, the criticism dressed up as concern, the night she'd read the messages with his socks still warm in her hand. "You sent me a note," she said. "I did. It said we need to talk." A small knowing smile. "Ethan, I haven't needed to talk to you in 8 months. You just didn't notice the conversation had ended." He flinched. "5 minutes," he said. "Please, after everything you can give me 5 minutes." And here Charlotte did something that surprised even Denise, who was watching from across the room with her arms crossed, ready to intervene. She nodded. "5 minutes," Charlotte said. "Outside, because I have something to say to you too, and I'd rather not say it in front of 300 people." They walked toward the terrace doors together, and the whole room watched them go, and Vanessa watched them go, and the champagne glass in her hand tilted, and a thin line of gold spilled onto the marble floor, and she didn't even notice, because she had just realized something that turned her cold from the inside out. If Charlotte took him back, Vanessa would be discarded. And if Charlotte didn't take him back, then Ethan had blown up his marriage, blown up his reputation, blown up everything for Vanessa, which meant Vanessa would be stuck with a broken, guilt-ridden man whose heart was somewhere else entirely. Either way, she had lost. There was no version of this night where Vanessa Cole walked out a winner. She had been so certain just 1 hour ago, holding that wine glass, smiling that smile. And now she stood alone in a sea of people watching the two halves of her plan walk out onto a terrace together, and understanding finally that she had never been playing the game she thought she was playing. She had thought it was a game about beauty. It had always been a game about worth, and Vanessa had bet her entire life on the wrong one. Out on the terrace, the noise of the gala fell away behind the glass doors. Ethan turned to face his wife, and for a long moment he didn't speak. He looked at her, the red gown, the calm in her eyes, the woman he had failed so completely, and he didn't know where to begin. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "Charlotte, I am so sorry. For all of it. For her, for the things I said to you, for the way I made you feel like you were less than you are. I see it now. I see you now, and I—" "Stop." Charlotte's voice was gentle. That was the thing that undid him. It wasn't cold. It wasn't cruel. It was gentle, the way you're gentle with someone you've already let go of. "Don't apologize because you finally saw me tonight, Ethan. That's not love, that's just embarrassment. That's not— You didn't fall back in love with me at that gala. You fell in love with how the room looked at me." She shook her head, and there was no anger in it, only a kind of clear-eyed sadness. "If I'd walked in tonight in my old navy dress, if Patricia hadn't called my name, if Harold Whitman had walked right past me, you'd still be in there with your hand on her back, wouldn't you?" Ethan opened his mouth and closed it, because they both knew the answer. "That's what I thought," Charlotte said softly. And in that silence, with the muffled applause of the gala still leaking through the glass, and the city glittering far below, Ethan Bennett finally understood the full and unbearable shape of what he had done. He had not lost his wife at this gala. He had been losing her for years, one dismissal at a time, one criticism at a time, one night out with Vanessa at a time. The gala was just the night he finally turned around and noticed the room was empty. "Is there any chance," he said, and his voice broke on the words, "any chance at all that we could—" Charlotte looked at him for a long, long moment, and then she gave him her answer. "You didn't lose me tonight, Ethan." Charlotte's voice was steady and quiet and final. "You lost me years ago. The night you decided supporting your career mattered more than my future. The morning you called my designs amateur in front of your friends and laughed when I went red. The 1,000 little times you sighed when I spoke like I was a chore you were too tired to finish." She held his gaze. "I stopped being your wife a long time ago, Ethan. Tonight is just the night you finally noticed the chair was empty." Ethan stood there on the terrace, and something inside him collapsed slowly, the way a building comes down floor by floor. "I can change," he said. "Charlotte, I swear to you I can be the man I should have been. Give me a chance to prove it. I'll do anything. Counseling, whatever you want. I'll quit the affair tonight. You already did the affair, Ethan. You can't quit something you've already done." He flinched. "And I don't want you to change for me." She said it kindly, which made it worse. "Because if you change for me, you'll just change back the moment I stop watching. The only kind of change that means anything is the kind you do for yourself when no one's keeping score." She took a breath. "I hope you find a reason to do that someday. I really do. But it won't be me. I'm not your reason anymore. I'm finally my own." A long silence stretched between them. Down below, the city went on glittering indifferent. "There's someone else, isn't there?" Ethan said, and there was an ugly edge of accusation in it, the reflex of a man looking for somewhere to put the blame. And Charlotte laughed. Not cruelly. She laughed because it was so perfectly exactly the wrong thing to say, and so perfectly exactly like him. "There it is," she said. "Even now, even here. You can't imagine I left because of who you were. You need it to be about another man." She shook her head. "There's no one else, Ethan. That's what you can't understand. I didn't leave you for someone. I left you for me. And honestly, the fact that you can't tell the difference is the whole reason I'm standing out here in a red dress while you're standing there with nothing to say." She turned to go. "Charlotte." His voice cracked. "Please." She stopped her hand on the door and looked back at him one last time. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said. "Take care of yourself, I mean that." And she walked back inside into the warmth and the light and the people who knew her name, and she did not look back, not once. And the terrace door swung shut behind her with a soft click that sounded to Ethan Bennett like the closing of a book he would never be allowed to read again. He stood alone on the terrace for a long time. Inside, the gala carried on without him, and it was inside near the bar that the night's second collapse was already underway. Vanessa had watched Charlotte and Ethan disappear onto the terrace, and she had spent every one of those minutes spiraling. She'd finished the champagne, started another, and by the time Charlotte came back inside, alone, glowing, untouchable, and Ethan did not follow, Vanessa had arrived at a conclusion that made her stomach turn. I was choosing his wife. Even in rejection, even in failure, he was choosing Charlotte over her, because a man does not chase a woman onto a terrace and beg unless the woman he's begging is the one who matters. Vanessa set down her glass and walked toward Charlotte. People watched her go. The whole room had been watching all night, and now they leaned in for the last act they could feel coming. "You think you won something," Vanessa said low when she reached her. Charlotte turned. She regarded Vanessa with an expression that wasn't triumph, wasn't even dislike. It was something closer to pity, and pity was the one thing Vanessa could not survive. "I'm not playing Vanessa," Charlotte said simply. "That's the part you can't understand. You think this was a competition. It was never a competition. I didn't show up tonight to beat you. I didn't even think about you. I showed up because Patricia asked me to. You humiliated me up there." "No." Charlotte's voice was almost gentle. "I told the truth about my own life. If it fit you, that's not on me. That's on you." Vanessa's composure cracked down the middle. "Do you have any idea what I gave up for him?" she hissed. And suddenly the polish was gone, and underneath was something raw and frightened. "I turned down a transfer to Milan. I ended things with a man who actually wanted to marry me. I rearranged my entire life around Ethan because he promised me he was leaving you. He said it was practically over. He said you were just furniture. He hadn't gotten around to throwing out yet." She stopped. She heard the word as it left her mouth. Furniture. The word she'd used. The word Charlotte's speech had so quietly turned into a confession of who Vanessa was, and she saw in Charlotte's eyes that she had just handed her the last piece of the puzzle. "He told you it was practically over," Charlotte repeated slowly. "Yes, for 8 months. "Yes," Vanessa said, and her voice was breaking now. "He kept saying after the next quarter, after the next deal, after the gala, he said. He said after tonight everything would be different." And Charlotte understood. The whole shape of it clicked into place. Ethan had not just been lying to her, he had been lying to Vanessa too. He had kept both women suspended, each one waiting for a future he never intended to deliver, because the truth was that Ethan Bennett had never wanted to choose. He'd wanted the comfortable wife and the exciting mistress, and the only thing he'd ever truly been committed to was his own convenience. "Oh, Vanessa," Charlotte said softly, and she meant it. "He did to you exactly what he did to me. He told you that you were the future and treated you like the present. He kept you waiting for a door that was never going to open." She shook her head slowly. "You spent 8 months becoming the other woman, and he was never going to make you the only woman. You weren't his prize, Vanessa. You were just his escape." And there it was. The thing Vanessa had refused to see all night, all 8 months, maybe her whole life. She had thought she was the woman who won men, but she had only ever been the woman men used to avoid dealing with the women they should have been honest with. "You're lying," Vanessa said, but there was no force in it. "Am I?" Charlotte tilted her head toward the terrace doors. "He's still out there. Go ask him. Go ask him what his plan was after tonight. Go ask him if he ever actually filed anything. Ever told a lawyer, ever did one single concrete thing to make you the future he promised." She paused. "I'll save you the trouble. He didn't. Because men like Ethan don't leave. They just collect. And right now, you and I are both just things he collected and lost on the same night." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears she was furious about. She blinked them back hard. "I don't need your pity." "It's not pity," Charlotte said. "It's recognition. We're the only two people in this room who actually know what he is." She looked at Vanessa for a long moment, and something in her gaze shifted, softened into something almost like solidarity. "You're not my enemy, Vanessa. You never were. We were just two women a weak man pointed at each other, so we'd be too busy fighting to notice the truth about him." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to Vanessa Cole in years, and it came from the woman she'd poured wine on, and that was what finally broke her. She turned away so no one would see her face, and she walked fast toward the coat check, toward the exit, toward a night that had started with her holding all the cards and was ending with her holding nothing at all. She paused once at the door. She looked back. And what she saw was Charlotte Bennett surrounded by people who loved her, laughing at something Denise had said, glowing in red, completely whole. A woman who had walked into the night with nothing but 8 months of quiet work and had ended it as the most respected person in the room. And Vanessa understood finally and fully the lesson that would haunt her long after the gala lights went dark. Beauty had gotten her into every room she'd ever wanted, but it had never once kept her there, because rooms remember the people who give them something, and Vanessa had spent her whole life taking. She walked out into the cold. Behind her, the gala glittered on, and Ethan came in from the terrace, ashen hollow-eyed, and went looking for Vanessa, and found only an empty glass at the bar and a coat check tag she'd left behind. And he stood there in the middle of the party, holding that little numbered tag. This man who had had 2 women an hour ago and now had none, and the full arithmetic of his choices finally added up in front of him. He had wanted everything, and wanting everything he had ensured he would end with nothing. A reporter approached Charlotte near the dessert tables. "Mrs. Bennett, do you have a moment? The Tribune is running a feature on the statewide literacy initiative. I'd love a quote." "Of course," Charlotte said, "but it's not Mrs. Bennett anymore." The words came out before she'd fully decided to say them, and the moment they were out, she felt something lift off her shoulders that she hadn't even known was still there. "It's just Charlotte, Charlotte Hayes. I'm taking my own name back." The reporter wrote it down. "Charlotte Hayes, got it. And what would you say drove the success of the project?" Charlotte thought about it. She thought about the tiny room above the bakery, the towel pressed against her mouth, the girl in the parked car who couldn't remember the last time she laughed, the 6-year-old who said, "This is the best place I've ever been." "Belief," she said finally. "I think every child can tell whether the world expects something of them or expects nothing. I wanted to build rooms that expected something, rooms that said you matter, you belong, the world was made for you too." She smiled. "I spent a lot of years being told I didn't matter. Turns out that's exactly the kind of lie a person needs to spend their life proving wrong." The reporter looked up from her notepad, and there was something in her face beyond professional interest. "That's a hell of a quote." "It's a hell of a thing to finally believe," Charlotte said. Across the room, Denise materialized at her side with 2 glasses of water, because Denise had watched Charlotte stay sharp and sober through the most important night of her life and wasn't about to let her stumble at the finish. "So," Denise said, handing her a glass, he begged. And I told him goodbye." Charlotte took a sip of water. "And I meant it." Denise studied her old friend's face for any crack, any tremble, any sign that the goodbye had cost her something it shouldn't have. She didn't find one. What she found instead was peace, the rarest thing in the world, the thing money can't buy and beauty can't fake, and the thing Charlotte had spent 8 months building from scratch. "You're really okay," Denise said almost in wonder. "I'm really okay." Charlotte looked around the room at the people, at the lights, at the life she'd walked into as a ghost and was walking out of as herself. "You know what the strangest part is? An hour ago that woman poured wine on me and called me a stain, and I thought it would devastate me. I spent 8 months getting ready for tonight, and some part of me was braced to fall apart the second someone was cruel to me." She shook her head slowly. "And when it happened, I just felt sorry for her. That's how I knew. That's how I knew I was actually free. Not when I gave the speech, not when they stood up, when she tried to hurt me and missed. You saw me." Denise raised her water glass. "To missing." Charlotte laughed and clinked it. "To missing." And somewhere in the middle of that laugh, Ethan Bennett walked past them toward the exit. Alone, his tie loosened his face, the gray of a man who has just watched his whole life rearrange itself into a shape he doesn't recognize. He paused near them. He looked at Charlotte. He seemed for a moment like he might say something else, make one more attempt, find one more angle. And Charlotte just looked back at him, calm and kind and absolutely immovable, and Ethan understood that there was no angle left. There was no version of the words that would work. The woman in front of him was not the woman he'd married, and she was not the woman he'd ignored, and she was not the woman he'd suddenly wanted back the moment a room full of important people wanted her first. She was simply herself, and she did not need him, and there is nothing a man like Ethan can do with a woman who does not need him. "You look happy," he said finally. It came out quiet, defeated, almost wondering. "I am," Charlotte said. "I don't think I ever saw you happy, in 11 years. "No," Charlotte agreed without bitterness. "You didn't. But that wasn't because I couldn't be. It was because I couldn't be with you." She let that sit for a moment, then added gently, "That's not me being cruel, Ethan. That's just the truest thing I know how to tell you." He nodded slowly. There was nothing else to say. He walked out of the gala and out of her life, and Charlotte Hayes watched him go for exactly 1 second, the way you'd watch any stranger leave a party, and then she turned back to Denise, back to the warmth, back to the people who knew her name, and the door closed behind Ethan, and that was the end of 11 years, and it didn't hurt at all, and the not hurting was the most beautiful revenge she could have imagined, because it meant he had never really had her, not the real her, not the part that mattered. He had only ever had the version of her that he'd made small, and that version had walked out of the building 8 months ago in a parked car in the rain, asking herself a single question. Who were you before him? She knew the answer now. She was a woman who built places where children felt they belonged. She was a friend worth waiting in a parked car for. She was a designer, a leader, a name in tomorrow's paper. She was someone who could be insulted in front of 300 people and feel nothing but pity for the person doing the insulting. She was at last entirely and unmistakably herself. And the night was not even over, because Patricia Vega was crossing the room toward her now, and there was something in Patricia's hand, an envelope, and something in Patricia's face that Charlotte hadn't seen all evening, a barely contained, almost trembling excitement, the look of a woman holding news she could no longer keep inside. "Charlotte," Patricia said, slightly breathless, reaching her. "I wasn't going to do this tonight. I was going to wait until Monday. But after that speech, after watching you up there, I can't sit on it for another minute." She pressed the envelope into Charlotte's hands. "Open it." Charlotte looked down at the envelope, then up at Patricia, then over at Denise, who had gone very still. "Patricia, what is this?" "Open it," Patricia said again, her eyes shining. "Trust me. After everything you've been through to get to this room tonight, you have earned the right to read what's inside." And Charlotte Hayes, 8 months from the towel and the parked car and the warm socks in her hands, slid her finger under the flap of the envelope and began to open it. Charlotte slid the letter out of the envelope, unfolded it, and read the first line. Then she read it again because the words didn't seem to make sense the first time. "Patricia," she said slowly, "is this real? It's real. This says..." Charlotte's voice failed her. She looked up. "This says the Whitman Foundation is committing $4 million to the statewide initiative, and they want me to lead it, not consult, lead, as founding director." Denise made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "Harold pushed it through the board this afternoon," Patricia said, and now her own eyes were wet. "He's been working on it for 2 weeks, ever since he toured your center. He wanted to tell you himself tonight, but he said, and I'm quoting him exactly, he said that woman doesn't need an old man handing her a check to know what she's worth. Let her have her moment first." Patricia laughed and wiped her eyes. "So he had me hold the letter until after your speech." Charlotte looked down at the letter in her hands. $4 million, founding director, her name, her vision, her belief about children and light and low shelves and belonging scaled up across an entire state with the full weight of the most respected foundation in Chicago behind it. 8 months ago, she had been folding laundry reading messages that called her furniture. "I need to sit down," Charlotte said. "You need to do no such thing," Denise said, grabbing her by the shoulders. "You need to stand right here and let it land. You earned this, every dollar of it. Don't you dare shrink from it now." And Charlotte didn't. She let it land. She stood in the middle of that ballroom in her red gown, holding a letter that would change the lives of thousands of children she would never meet, and she let herself feel the full size of it, the full size of herself without apologizing for any of it. Harold Whitman appeared a moment later, having watched from across the room until he was sure she'd read it. "Don't thank me," he said before she could speak. "I didn't give you anything. I just got out of the way of something that was already happening." He took her hand in both of his. "I've funded a lot of projects in my life, Charlotte. Most of them I forget. You I'm going to remember, because you didn't build a program. You built a belief, and beliefs outlive all of us." Charlotte's throat was too tight to answer. She just held his hand and nodded. That was the night everything changed. Not because of the red dress, not because of the speech, not even because Ethan had been brought to his knees and Vanessa had walked out into the cold. Those were endings. The letter in her hands was a beginning, and Charlotte had learned the hard way that beginnings were worth far more than revenge. The weeks that followed moved fast. The Tribune feature ran on a Sunday with a photograph of Charlotte standing in the West Side Center surrounded by children, and the headline called her the woman reimagining how Illinois teaches its children to read. Her phone did not stop. Other states called. A National Education Foundation reached out. A publisher asked if she'd ever considered writing about design and belonging. She said yes to almost none of it at first. Denise asked her why. "Because I spent 11 years saying yes to everything except myself," Charlotte said. "I'm not in a hurry. I want to build this right, one center at a time, one room of good light at a time." She smiled. "I've got the rest of my life. I'm not going to rush the part where I finally get to enjoy it." The first new center opened in June in a neighborhood on the South Side that had never had anything like it. Charlotte was there for the opening, and so was Patricia, and so was Denise, and so were 150 families and a city councilwoman and Harold Whitman, who showed up unannounced and stood in the back and beamed. And there was a moment near the end of that opening that Charlotte would carry with her forever. She was standing in the reading nook, the low one, the one sized for small bodies, watching a little boy of about 7 climb in with a stack of books almost as tall as he was. He settled in. He opened the first book, and then he looked up at her, this stranger in nice clothes, and he asked her a question that stopped her heart. "Did you make this?" "I did," Charlotte said. "I thought about that." He looked around the room at the light, at the shelves he could reach, at the soft corners and the colors and the chairs that fit him. "It feels like it's for me," he said. And Charlotte had to step away just for a second, just like the very first opening, because that was the whole thing, wasn't it? That was the entire point of 8 months of quiet rebuilding and a red dress and a letter in an envelope. That a child she had never met could sit in a room she had made and feel, maybe for the first time in his life, that the world had made a place for him on purpose. "It is for you," she told him when she came back. "It's for exactly you." He nodded satisfied and went back to his book, and Charlotte stood there and understood that this, not the gala, not the speech, not the look on Ethan's face, this was the real revenge, the best revenge a person could ever take against everyone who told them they didn't matter. To go out and build a world that told someone else they did. Ethan tried to reach her twice that summer. The first time was a text 2 weeks after the gala. "I keep thinking about what you said. I think you were right about all of it. I'm trying to change. Not for you. For me. Thought you'd want to know." Charlotte read it. She felt a small, distant tenderness, the kind you feel for someone you once loved a long time ago. And then she felt nothing much at all. She did not reply, not out of cruelty, but because there was simply nothing left in her that needed to. The second time was a letter in September, longer, more honest. He wrote that he'd started counseling, that he'd ended things with Vanessa the night of the gala, though by then there had been nothing left to end. That he understood now what he'd thrown away, and that he didn't expect anything, didn't want anything, just wanted her to know that the woman she'd become had made him want to be a better man, and that he was sorry it had taken losing her to teach him a lesson he should have known on his wedding day. It was, Charlotte thought, the first genuinely unselfish thing Ethan had ever written to her. She wrote back 4 sentences. Thank you for this. I believe you and I'm glad you're doing the work. I hope you become the man you're describing for your own sake, and for whoever's lucky enough to know you next. Take care of yourself, Ethan. I mean it the same way I meant it on the terrace. And that was the last time they ever spoke. Two people who had spent 11 years together, ending it in 4 sentences, and a wish for each other's well-being, and it was in its quiet way the most peace either of them had felt in years. As for Vanessa, Charlotte heard about her only once. Denise, who had a gift for knowing everything about everyone, mentioned over coffee one morning that Vanessa Cole had left Chicago, taken a position in Milan after all the ones she'd turned down for Ethan, started over somewhere new where no one had watched her stand alone in the middle of a ballroom while the woman she'd insulted was given the keys to the city. Good for her, Charlotte said, and meant it. Denise raised an eyebrow. Good for her, she poured wine on you and called you a stain. She did. Charlotte stirred her coffee. And then she found out the same night that the man she'd burned her life down for had been lying to her too. That's a hard thing to learn in front of 300 people. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. She looked up. We were never enemies, Denise. We were just 2 women who got pointed at each other by a man too cowardly to be honest with either of us. I hope Milan is good to her. I hope she figures out she was always worth more than her face. Same as I had to. Denise shook her head slowly, a smile spreading across it. You know, most people would have thrown a party the day she left town. I did throw a party, Charlotte said. I opened a literacy center. And that was Charlotte Hayes in a single sentence. While other people kept score, she kept building. By the following spring, 1 year after the night of the gala, there were 6 centers open across Illinois, with 4 more under construction. The initiative had become a national model. Charlotte had testified before a state committee, had been profiled in a magazine she used to read in waiting rooms, had hired a team of 12, including, of course, Denise, who ran operations, and bullied everyone into eating lunch. But the thing Charlotte was proudest of wasn't the centers, or the funding, or the recognition. It was a Tuesday afternoon, almost exactly a year from that rainy day in the grocery store parking lot, when she realized she was sitting in her car again. Same kind of ordinary moment. Engine off, hands in her lap, errands waiting, and she noticed she was humming. She stopped. She sat very still the way she had a year before, and she remembered the woman who had sat in a parked car, asking when she had stopped being anyone's favorite person, when she had stopped being her own. Hey, she said quietly out loud to that woman, to the girl in the parked car who had started all of it. Look at us. Look what you built. And then Charlotte Hayes laughed alone in her car, a real laugh, the kind that surprises you, the kind she once couldn't remember the last time she'd had. She laughed until her eyes watered, not because anything was funny, but because she was happy, simply and completely happy, in a life that belonged entirely to her, that no one had given her and no one could take away. The red gown still hung in her closet. She kept it not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Denise had asked her once if she'd ever wear it again. Maybe, Charlotte had said, but it was never really about the dress. No. Everyone in that ballroom thought the dress was what stunned them. The dress walking in the dress in the spotlight. She shook her head. But the dress didn't do anything. The dress just got out of the way. What stunned that room was watching a woman who finally remembered what she was worth. You can't buy that. You can't fake it. You can't pour wine on it and make it go away. She smiled. The gown only revealed what was already standing there. They'd just spent so long not looking that they forgot I was even in the room. That was the truth at the center of everything. Not the betrayal, not the revenge, not the public triumph. The truth was simpler and harder than any of those. Charlotte had not become someone new that night. She had become herself again, and that it turned out was the most powerful transformation there is. Not the makeover, not the glow up, not the dramatic entrance that silences a room. Those things fade. The dress goes back in the closet. The applause dies down. The gala lights go dark. What doesn't fade is a woman who has remembered her own value, because once she remembers it, she can never again be convinced to forget. You can dismiss her. You can betray her. You can pour wine down the front of her dress in front of 300 people. And it will not touch the thing at the center of her, because that thing is no longer for sale, no longer up for debate, no longer dependent on whether anyone is looking. So if you take one thing from Charlotte's story, let it be this. Never underestimate a quiet woman. The world is full of people who mistake sacrifice for weakness, kindness for dependence, and silence for surrender. They are always wrong. A quiet woman is not an empty one. She is often a woman gathering herself in the dark in the parked car, in the small rented room above the bakery building, something the loud people will never see coming. And real beauty was never youth or wealth, or the way a room turns to look at you when you walk through the door. Real beauty is self-respect. It is purpose. It is integrity. It is the unshakable quiet courage to build a life that does not depend on anyone else's approval to be worth living. Charlotte Bennett walked into that gala as a ghost. Charlotte Hayes walked out as herself. And the woman who remembers her own worth becomes from that moment on completely and permanently impossible to diminish.